time. So let's get started. My name is Nora Fleming de Sandoval. I'm the education manager here at LeMay America's Car Museum in Tacoma, Washington. And I'm very excited that we have Linda Merkel, Executive Director of America on Wheels in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and Alan Gross, Exhibits Chair at the museum. They are here today to share about the current Hudson exhibit that they have there at America on Wheels. Before we get started, I wanted to share just a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you look at the bottom of your window, you can see that we have a Q&A, a question and answer box there. If you have a question that you don't want to forget during the presentation, go ahead and type that in there, and we will have some time at the end of the presentation to answer those questions. I can also, if you have a question at the end, if you want to just raise your hand, I can click on you and you can share it with us via your microphone. Second of all, this presentation is being recorded and we will post this up on our YouTube page by the end of the week. So if someone you know wasn't able to attend, you can share that link with them and then they'll be able to learn all about the Hudson. Now, without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Linda Merkel, Executive Director of America on Wheels in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Linda.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today, and you're going to hear a lot about our wonderful America on Wheels Museum. Today's show is going to be exciting. You will hear about cars that were featured between 1911 and 1957, all manufactured by the Hudson Motor Company and the Essex Motor Company. America on Wheels showcases over 70 cars, trucks, motorcycles, bicycles. So that actually means that we have something for everyone's enjoyment. So if you're out and about, and especially near Allentown, Pennsylvania, come on over and join us. Our mission is to showcase classic cars, very unique exhibits. We believe education is the heart and soul of all museums, and we entertain year-round with special events. So at this time, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Alan Gross. He is the exhibit chair for us for many years, since day one at America on Wheels Museum. I'm sure you will enjoy his expertise concerning Hudsons. The show is filled with creation, innovation, acceleration, and definitely fame. So sit back and remember, travel is an adventure. So please visit us at America on Wheels and enjoy today's show. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Pleased to be here today and welcome everyone. Before we begin to look at some really awesome Hudsons, I'll take a little bit of time to talk about the company. But first of all, the Hudsons you see here today are part of the Dr. Blake collection. It's probably one of the premier Hudson collections in the United States. And we have only a small part of what he has in his collection, but we have some of the most significant cars here. Talking a little bit about the Hudson Motor Car Company, it was incorporated in 1909 in Detroit, Michigan, and there were 8 initial investors in the company, one being Joseph L. Hudson, who was a wealthy entrepreneur, and he owned the Hudson department stores. He agreed to let the corporation use his name for the vehicles, although he really wasn't involved in the operations at all of the Hudson Motor Car Company. That responsibility went to a fellow by the name of Roy D. Chapin Sr. He was a car guy, and he had gasoline running through his veins. He was really committed. He worked previously for the Oldsmobile company for Ransom E. Olds, so he was very familiar with forming a brand new company, as Oldsmobile did, and making it successful. So as it turns out, it was a very good choice to bring him on board. testimonial to his ability, the production of Hudson started in July of 1909. And they actually sold 1,100 Hudsons in basically a half a year. And those 1,100 cars were sold as 1909 models. The first full year of production was 1910, and they sold 4,500 cars in 1910. This is absolutely amazing for a startup company, because there was so many small startup companies back then, and they were all vying for a very small customer base. There wasn't a lot of people buying automobiles back then. So the fact that they were able to sell 4,500 cars in their first full year of production is astounding. They produced cars from 1909 to 1954, and then through 1957 under the AMC, the American Motor Company, and that was after the merger with Nash Kelvinator. So 1957 was really the last year for the Hudson label. Hudsons generally were positioned in the mid-price range, certainly above the Chevrolets and Fords, below the Packards and Cadillacs and so forth. This changed a little bit throughout the years. With the introduction of the Essex, they then started to compete with directly with Ford and Chevy at the low price end. There's some interesting innovations that Hudson had. I'll just name a few of what I consider the most significant innovations for the company. They had balanced crankshafts, and what that meant is cast in the crank were a lot of counterweights, so the crankshaft was balanced, and also involved some precision machining. And that was a first. And what that allowed the engines to do is operate at a much higher RPM, and so produce more horsepower, if you will. That was something that they were very innovative on, and their engines were known to run very smoothly and able to operate at a higher RPM than all the competition. Another innovation was the emergency brake. Today we call it a parking brake, but back then most of the brakes were what we call mechanical brakes, which were rods and levers and springs and so forth. And most cars only had brakes on the rear wheels, no brakes up front. And even when the first hydraulic brakes came out, they basically had one reservoir which handled both the front and the back brakes. So in any case, if you had a failure with the hydraulic system, all your brakes would go out front and back. Or if you had the mechanical brakes, a rod broke or something disconnected, you would lose your brakes. So they came up with a separate brake called an emergency brake. So in the event that you would lose your brakes, you'd pull the emergency brake and the car would stop. So that was very innovative. Today, it's almost, you never see total brake failure on a car today because they have split reservoirs between the front and back. They came out with the first affordable mass-produced sedan, and that was in 1922, and it was an Essex. Okay, up to that point, most of the cars, just about all the cars, were open cars, roadsters, or touring cars. And the American buying public by the 1920s were looking for something that was warmer in the winter in the cold climates and more weatherproof. So they were looking for closed cars, and Essex came out with really the first mass-produced totally closed sedan in 1922. The other big innovation, probably they're best known for, is the step-down models in the early 1950s, and they were a dominating car in racing. So we'll talk a little bit more about the step-down models when we look at a Hudson in that era. So if we're ready now, we'll start looking at some cool automobiles. Okay, this particular car is a 1911 Hudson 33 touring car. It was the third year of production. Obviously, they started in 1909. This is 1911. One thing you'll see on this is right-hand drive. It's not an export model. At that point in time, the automotive manufacturers really haven't or didn't determine a standard for the position of the steering column, whether it be on the right side or the left side. This particular car has the steering on the right side. Obviously, eventually they all agreed on left-hand steering, which we have now. This car has an L-head straight four engine, 226 cubic inch. It has a 1-barrel Stromberg carburetor, and it produced 33 horsepower. And again, it has mechanical brakes just on the rear. There's no brakes on the front of the car. And the total production of all models in 1911 was 6,486 vehicles. So they continued to sell more and more vehicles. The car you see here on display is up on a platform, and the windows you see behind it, it's part of a design element of our museum. If you enter the first floor in the lobby, the ceiling's 33 feet high, and we of course have cars displayed in the lobby. So when our visitors are looking at those cars in the lobby, they look up and see these awesome cars behind the glass, and the cars are on the second floor, which this car is. So it's a design element of the building, and it kind of piques the visitors' interest. I got to go up and see what's happening up there. So the next slide, please. Okay, this particular car is a 1916 Hudson Cabriolet Super Six. Now, this is the first year of the famous Super Six engine. The engine was a flat six, 288 cubic inches. It had a 1-barrel Zenith carburetor, and it produced 76 horsepower. Race car driver of the day, called Ralph Mulford, in April of 1960, set a new mile record of 102 miles per hour at Daytona Beach, Florida, in a car just like this. And the new 24-hour record was an average speed of 74.8 miles per hour. Okay, next slide, please. You're probably wondering, looking at that previous photo, it's not really a cabriolet. Well, it is a cabriolet. It started out as a cabriolet, which means it had a roll-up windows in the doors and a full windshield. But it had a convertible top that folded down. Somewhere during the history of this car, and I can imagine the owner probably wanted something a little more weatherproof and maybe a little more warmer in the winter months, actually converted this car to a closed coupe. So it's a cabriolet that was converted. Now, Dr. Blake made the decision to just keep it the way it was, and I would agree 100% with his decision. This is part of the vehicle's history. They did a very, very nice job of converting it. If you look at it really close, the workmanship is very nice, and it was done as a coupe would have been constructed back in that period of time. So it retains that modification today. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a 1919 Essex, and it was the first year for Essex production. Essex was a separate company, but it was totally owned by Hudson. And it was treated as a separate company until 1922. Then it became a brand of the Hudson Motor Car Company. It was designed to compete with Ford and Chevrolet at the lower price points. And again, it was credited with, in 1922, actually, with the first fully enclosed sedan body. If you look at this body, the entire top is a vinyl top. It's not a steel top. The steel part of the body ends at the top of the windows, although it is completely enclosed and the windows are roll up, but the top remains a vinyl material, although it's not movable, it's stationary. And this is one of 3 vehicles registered today. And it has this Essex has an L-head straight 4 engine of 179 cubic inch. Okay, next photo, please. Okay, this is a 1927 Essex Super Six speedabout. We refer to them as Motel Speedsters. It's interesting that it has the L-head 6 engine, 144 cubic inches, has a 1-barrel Stewart carburetor, and it has 55 horsepower. And this had a top speed of approximately 80 miles per hour. Basically, it was a Hudson show car, and they made very few of these. An interesting side note, Hudson did not make their own bodies in the period of 1923 to 1927. The bodies were all farmed out to a company by the name of Biddle and Smart in Amesbury, Massachusetts. That was the same company that made the bodies for the Rolls-Royce Springfield, which were manufactured in Massachusetts. It's interesting because Biddle and Smart did not have the equipment or the expertise at that time to stamp large stampings of steel, so all the bodies were aluminum. So the Hudson bodies during that period of time were all aluminum. In 1926, Hudson opened their own body manufacturing facility. It was a brand new plant that they constructed. So from that point on, they made their own bodies and no longer relied on Biddle and Smart for their bodies, although Biddle and Smart would continue for a few years making certain custom applications for Hudson. This body is not an aluminum body. This is a steel body. So that indicates that it was made in the new factory that Hudson opened up in 1926. Okay, the next photo, please. Okay, this just shows the bow tail feature of this vehicle, and it's got its name because it comes to a point in the back and resembles a boat. So we call them bow tail speedsters today. Next photo, please. Okay, this vehicle is a 1930 Hudson 8 rumble seat coupe. This is the first year for the 8-cylinder engine. Next slide, please. That's just a photo of the front spare tire mount. And they're still using wooden wheels. As you can see, they're just painted. Next photo, please. Okay, this is a photo of the straight 8 engine that's in this car. It's an L head, again, a straight 8, 213 cubic inches. It's got a Marvel carburetor in it, and it produces 80 horsepower. It's interesting. In 1931 in Indianapolis 500, a Hudson engine race car finished in 10th place, basically using this engine that you see here. The car was driven by Chet Miller, and he was relieved toward the end of the race by a driver by the name of Brian Solbo. They had relief drivers back then. It was quite common. The car, again, finished 10th in the race, and it qualified at 106 miles per hour. So it was a very, very fast engine for the day. Next photo, please. Okay, this is a 1933 Essex Terraplane 8. Okay. In 1932, Hudson began phasing out the Essex nameplate for a more modern nameplate called a Terraplane. So initially they were branded as Essex Terraplanes, and then later on in the 1930s, they were just Terraplanes. So this is 33 Essex Terraplane. It's interesting because they did promotional advertising, and Amelia Earhart actually christened the vehicle in their advertising. So that was a big publicity marketing thing that Hudson did. And it was appropriate because Terraplane was a play on words of aeroplane. Aeroplane being, sky, Amelia Earhart, and Terraplane being the turf. So it was a play on that word. So they got Amelia Earhart to christen the car. It was very interesting. This car has wire spoke wheels. So at this point, they're getting away from the wooden spoke wheels. And it has suicide doors, which means the doors are hinged at the back and the handle is in the front. Both the front and the rear doors are that way. And we call them suicide doors. Over the years, they got that name because if you're going down the road 35, 40 miles an hour and the door happens to open up, or somebody opens the door up, Again, being hinged at the back, the front of the door would come out, the wind would catch it, and good possibility tear the door off, or the occupant would fall out of the car. So they got the name suicide doors. After 19, you can give us the next slide, please. That's the spare tire on this car. Again, it's a rear mounted, completely covered. The Essex name was actually dropped after 1933, and then it just became Terraplane. Okay, next slide, please. This is a 1935 Hudson 8. This is probably my favorite car in the collection. At this time, Hudson was gradually smoothing out the lines of their cars. It evolved toward a more enveloping body. The bodywork was curved. If you see the roof line there, the squared off roof lines had disappeared. There's more curves. It's more of an Art Deco type look to the cars. And if you look at this car, it looks like a much more expensive car than it really was. And if you look at the grille and the windshield, they're canted backwards, give it a nice aerodynamic look. And it's really an overall very good looking automobile. This car has steel artillery wheels now. They're getting away from the wire spoke wheels at this point. The artillery wheels were much more sturdy, better for the heavier cars, better for handling, and so forth. This has the fender mounted what we call six wheels. There was a fender mount on each fender, and they have covers on them, so very sleek looking. And if you look, it also has the suicide doors. Again, the handles are in the front, hinges in the back. Okay, next slide, please. It has a beautiful integrated trunk, and this photo shows just the rounding of all the corners of the car. And it just makes it look like such an elegant vehicle, including the curvature of the rear window. The trunk's fully enclosed now, and it's also curved to match the curve of the roof line. Next slide, please. This is the hood ornament on that car. It's a flying eagle. Again, very elegant. Wings are swept back, similar to what the grille and the windshield are. So it continued that design element throughout the car. Very, very beautiful car. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a 53 Hudson. It actually has a couple, the hood ornament's actually a 52 and a couple 52 elements to the grille. That was something that was changed on this car over the year, but it is a verified 53 model. And this is what is known as the step down model. And this car has what we call today a unibody construction. And what that means is the chassis and the body was one integral unit, as opposed to the way cars were typically made back then, where the body was separate and it would be sitting on top of the frame and attached to the frame. This is one integral unit. Okay, it's what we call, again, unibody construction. And this was started with the 1948 model. And after World War II, Hudson was one of probably the first company to come out with a totally new model. All the other manufacturers, they were warmed up pre-World War II models till they were able to get all their assembly lines and so forth up and running, and new models designed. The step-down model is very low and it handles great. And if you look at how it was designed, again, it's unibody, but the floor of the passenger compartment is actually mounted underneath the frame as opposed to being set on top of the frame. And that is the step down thing that we always talk about. When you get in, you have to step over the sill, and just like most cars are today, quite honestly. But what this did, it made for a lot more interior room, a lot more leg room and headroom. And it also allowed them to lower the roof line quite a bit. Okay, the car has an L-head inline six. Now, what that is the racing engine that they used in NASCAR and also AAA sanctioned stock car racing. It's called the Twin H, had two carburetors, two one-barrel carburetors, and 308 cubic inches and 160 horsepower. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is the side view of the car. Now, it's a little reflection on there coming through the windows, but you can see, looking at the side of these cars, it almost appeared that all of them had fender skirts on the back. But that's not the case. That's actually the body. And believe it or not, the frame rails on the back of this car are outboard of the rear wheels. In other words, the wheels are inside the frame rails on the back. And that allowed the body to be fitted to the unibody structure right over the rear wheels. So they're not really fender skirts, it's really an extension of the body. Okay. And this, if you look at the car, it's very aerodynamically designed. They paid a lot of attention to aerodynamics on this car, and it really paid dividends on the racetrack. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a display engine, but it's the exact same engine that's inside that car we just looked at. And again, this is the Hudson Twin 8 engine that dominated racing in the early 50s, really from 51 right on through 54. Again, 308 cubic inches and 160 horsepower. If you look at NASCAR racing in the early 50s, and also, again, AAA sanctioned racing, this Hudson Hornet had 108 victories in that time period from 51 to 54. It was practically unbeatable. 80 of those victories were in NASCAR, and I think the other 28 were in AAA sanctioned stock car racing. It was virtually unbeatable. And the incredible part is it was racing against Oldsmobiles and Cadillacs who at the time had overhead valve V8 engines. So the engine was a little bit more powerful in this engine, but they made up the deficit in horsepower in handling. The car handled so well, the other cars couldn't keep up in the corners. And this had to do, again, with the unibody construction, the aerodynamics of the body, and the car was only 60 inches high. It was able to be so low because of the step-down design. So the lack of the disadvantage in horsepower was more than made up in the corners. And there's nothing that could beat it. It was absolutely incredible that during that period, they had 108 victories with the car. At the time, Hudson was probably one of the first companies that the factory actually backed the racing program. They gave their drivers the cars for free, and they had a direct connection with the factory on parts and any new developments that made the cars either handle better or go faster. So it was a real factory backing of the race teams back then. The most successful drivers were Marshall Teague, Herb Thomas, Tim Flock, and Dick Rathman. Those were, all four of those drivers were factory drivers, and there were some others as well. A side note, the chief mechanic on Marshall Teague's car was none other than Smokey Unick. And a lot of us know Smokey over the years. He was known for fudging the rules a little bit. Well, I guess that's a tremendous understatement. He fudged the rules a lot. And he was known for that. And many of the rules in racing, especially stock car racing, came about because of him. He'd try something that, well, that wasn't really the intent of that rule. So they'd make another rule to stop it, and then he'd come up with something else. So he had a very interesting career. A couple of things he did with the Hudsons, at least things that he admitted to. He played around with reversing the rotation of the engine. He said that made the car handle better, because in left-hand turns, of course, stock car racing, you're always turning left. So he played around with that for a while. Another thing that he did, remember, Hudson was known for their well-balanced crankshafts, which made the engines very smooth, and they were able to perform at a higher RPM. And that was because there was a lot of counterweights cast into their crankshafts, which made them pretty heavy. So what Smokey did is to lighten that up a little bit. And again, you lighten it up a couple of pounds, it was worthwhile. He took the flywheel off, okay, and removed the gear on the flywheel. And then he drilled the flywheel in a rotary type position. In other words, he went around the edge of the flywheel and drilled holes in the flywheel toward the center of the flywheel. And when he was done drilling and relieving all that weight, he put the gear back on. And of course, the gear covered all the holes that he put in the flywheel. And of course, the inspectors looked at it and said, oh, this looks fine, nothing wrong there. Well, because they didn't see the holes. So that was just a couple of things that he did. I'm sure there was many more, which either were discovered eventually, or he moved on to other things. Marshall Teague had a falling out with NASCAR, I believe, in 1952. So then he went to AAA and raced extensively in AAA. So he has quite a few of those 28 victories, also quite a few victories prior to his falling out in NASCAR. Okay, next slide, please. This is a 1954 Hudson Super Jet. This is the car that Hudson intended to go forward with. It's an economy car. It's a small car. And they realized that that was the route to go in the future. So at this point in time, they were in financial trouble already. And they put a lot of money into total development of this particular vehicle in hopes that they'd go forward with this, which really never worked out. But their financial situation really resulted in the merger with Nash Kelvinator and eventually becoming the American Motors Corporation, AMC. And they ended up producing Hudsons up until 1957 under the AMC banner. But unfortunately, when they joined, merged with Nash Kelvinator and became AMC, George Romney at that time was the president and CEO of AMC. And he too thought that American cars were too big and we should go with a smaller car. But the choice became the Rambler, the Nashrambler, instead of the Hudson Super Jet. So that really was the end of this car, the demise of this car. This particular car is a completely original vehicle. This has never been touched, never been restored. It's got the original paint, interior, all the chrome, every single thing on this vehicle is original. It's quite a spectacular little car. One of the other things, in my opinion, but I think other people probably have the same opinion, is why did Hudson lose so much money in the early 50s? Because they had this step-down model that was very popular. One thing is, it was hard for an independent to compete with the three major auto companies, and they just didn't have the finances to do that. But as popular as a step-down model was, that was probably part of the reason they got into financial trouble. And the reason I say that, in 1948, they spent a ton of money in designing and developing that vehicle. And it was, again, very well accepted. The public loved it. But with the unibody construction, they couldn't change models quickly, okay? So what they did from 51 into 54 basically is they just did cosmetic changes on that unibody frame and cage. So they were limited to just cosmetic changes. And as those years progressed, the customers were turned off by that. They wanted to see a completely new car, including chassis and everything. And Hudson just didn't have the money to change over from that unibody platform that they were using. So their sales went down, and the sales went down. they had less money. So as again, that was one of the contributing factors. And then they had to spend a lot of money on the Hudson Jet, which didn't work out. Okay, next slide, please. This is a Rambler, a Nash Rambler, okay? And again, George Romney's focus was on this car. And probably you can understand that because he was the head of Nash. And when they merged and formed AMC, he became the CEO of AMC as well. So he was probably a little bit biased and picked the Nash to go forward as their small car. And again, he didn't like the big cars that the American companies were producing, and he wanted to go with a small economical car, and this was the car. Now, it's interesting though, they actually rebadged the Nash Rambler to be sold at some of the Hudson dealerships that remained. And this happens to be one of those. This, as you can see on the front grille, that's a Hudson badge on there. And then they were sold at the remaining Hudson dealerships. They're pretty rare. And again, most of them were sold as Nash Ramblers. We had a little fun with this car here. This, you can't see in the back, but we have a couple surfboards hanging out the back. This is called Rio Red, which is a very, very cool color. And again, this is probably the car that the surfers in the 1960s in California probably would have used. To put the back seat comes down, put their surfboards in the back. So we had a little fun displaying this car at the museum. Okay, next slide, please. All right, this is the end of Hudson. This is the 1957 model. This is the last Hudson produced. If you look at the company, it's pretty incredible. They had almost a 50-year run as an independent. And at one point, believe it or not, they were the third largest manufacturer of automobiles behind Ford and Chevrolet. And they had a very good run for almost 50 years. It's pretty incredible. They built some beautiful cars. The cars were well constructed and well engineered. This 57 is a little bit modified. Again, they didn't have any money to change the body styles, but these cars were actually made at the Nash plant in Kenosha, Wisconsin, because they had already shut down the Hudson plant in Detroit. And so all the Hudsons were now based on the senior Nash chassis with some distinctive Hudson styling. But what they did in 57 for this car, which is really unique and it's indicative of the financial trouble they were in, at that point in time, the three big manufacturers were starting to put fins on their cars. And that was the trend in design. The bigger the fin, the better, okay? So Hudson was saying, boy, we can't change the model. We don't design, and we just don't have the money to do that. So what they did is, next photo, please. They took the 56 model basically, and they added bolt-on fins. And there's a close-up of the bolt-on fin. It's hard to tell. They did a really good job on it, but it's actually bolted to the 56 fender. So that really updated the look of the car, and it kind of kept them in competition, if you will, with the big three who were all embracing the fins at the time. So again, that's the end of Hudson. Be available here for questions.
Yes, great. We have a couple of questions in our
Okay.
Q&A section. And this first one is, my research shows that the Hudson Rambler sold for about $62 more than a Nash. Oh, I guess this is kind of a comment, even though they were identical cars. And this is from Tom Titmus.
Question is that true? Is that the question?
I think it's just more of a comment rather than a question. He
Oh, okay, yeah.
did a little research and said it was sold for a little bit more expensive than the Nash.
Yeah, you might be right. I mean, that's very possible. I do know they sold anywhere from 1700 to 1975 in that price range, depending on whether it was a sedan or a station wagon and some of the options you could get on it. But yeah, that's very interesting.
Nice. All right. And then another question we have is, what role did Hudson play during World War II in the sense of manufacturing during World War II, you know, once the automobile plants were closed down?
That's a good question. They produced a lot of aircraft parts. One of the things they did produce was the engine that was used in all the landing crafts. We all see the photos of D-Day where they're launching these landing crafts and all the soldiers are put in there like sardines. And those are the crafts that go right up on the shore. Just about all of those had a specially built Hudson engine just for that application.
Oh, wow. All right, that's interesting. Thank you. And then another question we had is, what would you say was the most important innovation that Hudson had that other manufacturers also decided to implement as a result?
I would say the step down body, that whole unibody thing. The other manufacturers weren't interested at that time, but now all the bodies are that, all the cars are basically that. So I think that's one of the things that continues and was very important.
Do we have any? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think if one of the major three manufacturers had embraced that initially in the 1950s, they would have had the money to continue that and make the changes necessary in the years afterward, which Hudson didn't have.
Any other questions? Does anyone want to raise their hand or type another question in? All right, it looks like that's it. Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you, Linda, for sharing your exhibit today. It was wonderful to see and learn so much about the Hudson. Like I said, I'll go ahead and put this recording up on our YouTube channel and share the link with you all so that way you can share that out with your groups as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing America on Wheels with everyone. We appreciate it.
Of course, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Here.